It's not a call to order, that's a salutation. Mr. Jordan, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, allow me on behalf of Mr. Mandela, who will be joining us shortly, and on behalf of the Nelson Mandela Foundation, to welcome you all and thank you for your presence here this morning. Today we are hosting two interrelated though distinct events. On the one hand, Mr. Yutar and Richard Stengel are donating to the Foundation's Centre of Memory and Dialogue a priceless collection of sound recordings dating from the mid-1990s. At the same time, the Oppenheimer family is donating to the South African state a collection of Percy Yutar's papers documenting the Rivonia Trial of 1963-64. The sound recordings mark the end of a very long journey travelled by Mr. Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. That work began in a close collaborative endeavour on Robben Island in 1975. It ended 20 years later when Mr. Yutar and Rick Stengel assisted Madiba to update and prepare the manuscript for publication. In the process, both men spent many hours in conversation with Madiba, pushing his memory and extending his analysis of historical events. And later, Mr. Yutar continued working with Madiba as they collaborated with Anthony Sampson on the authorized biography. The result is a unique archive of Madiba's often very intimate engagement with his own memory. The significance of today is that for the first time this archive is being brought into the custody of an archival institution. And here at the Nelson Mandela Foundation, the tapes will be processed, digitized, transcribed, and ultimately made accessible to the public. This should be the destiny of all materials documenting the life and work and times of Nelson Mandela, wherever they are in the world, in whatever state, and in whoever's possession. They belong as a resource to the world in safe and professional custody. Secondly, today we will be witnessing the handover of the long itinerant prosecution records from the Rivonia Trial. Recently, UNESCO acknowledged the importance in the world of the Rivonia Trial archive by installing it on the UNESCO Memory of the World Register. And yet, the harsh reality is that much of the trial's official records is still missing. Despite the best endeavors of government and private investigators, we still don't know the full reach of this almost archetypal South African archival tale. But it is one of many, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission documented so well. In the latter stages of apartheid government, huge swaths of the official record were removed, hidden, or destroyed. The Percy Yutar papers are a rich and invaluable part of South Africa's heritage. And today, they document the prosecution's work in the Rivonia Trial and include handwritten notes and a personal diary of Nelson Mandela. In the 1990s, the Oppenheimer family, in consultation with Madiba, purchased the papers from Percy Yutar, thus bringing them from willful personal custody into secure archival custody in the family's Renters Library. But ultimately, they belong with the rest of the state's Rivonia Trial record in our national archives. And today, we witness the end of their long journey home. So two very distinct events are joined by Madiba's intense personal interest in both and by the strong narrative theme common to both: South African archival heritage coming home. Many people have worked hard over the years to make today's event possible, and it is our hope that their efforts will be an example to many others who could facilitate rather than frustrate the coming home of our heritage. We begin formalities today with the Percy Yutar papers, and it is my great pleasure and a thankful pleasure to call to the microphone Mr. Oppenheimer.
Jakes, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests, and especially those who were part of the proceedings of the Rivonia Trial. It's a great pleasure for me to be standing here representing the Oppenheimer family, and later in the proceedings to be able to hand over Percy Yutar's papers to the National Archive. Jakes, as you rightly say, the Rivonia Trial was a seminal trial in South Africa's history, involving all sorts of distinguished people, both in the dock and on the defensive team, and it was something that really changed, I believe, the world's perception of what was going on in South Africa and mobilized huge support for the defendants and everything they stood for. The papers that my father managed to acquire, as you said, were those of the personal papers of Percy Yutar, the chief prosecutor, relating to this trial. And when my father heard at the time that these papers might be available for sale, he was absolutely determined that they should not leave South Africa. And he was able to negotiate with Percy Yutar, and as you say, with the support and help of Nelson Mandela, to be able to acquire these papers, and they have, so to speak, been resting for a time in the Brenthurst Library, a great collection of Afrikaner. And as soon as it became possible, my sister wrote to the National Archive suggesting that it would be right and appropriate for these papers to reside in the National Archive, with the rider, which is so important, that they needed to be properly looked after and to be available for researchers to study and to work on in the years ahead. We have received all those necessary assurances, and so from the family perspective, and it's really nice that my sister and members of her family are here with us today, we are really proud to be able to be passing these papers, which we've simply been custodian of for a short time, to the National Archive, and that we will shortly, in the presence of Nelson Mandela, hand them over, first of all, to the Minister for Onward Movement, to the National Archive. We are pleased to be able to do this because this is part of South African history and part of history that needs to be available to all South Africans. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicky. Can I now call on the Minister, Minister Jordan?
Thank you, Professor Hello. Mr. Arthur Jaskelson, Advocate George Bezos. By the way, no, George, sorry, Your Honor, Dr. Jaskelson, George Bezos, Mr. Dennis Goldberg, Kathy Kathrada, Mr. Stengel, Mrs. Mary Slack, Mr. Nicky Oppenheimer. There are lots of other people I suppose one should recognize who were in one way or another connected with the case. But to cover myself, I'll say all protocol observed, distinguished guests. This is a very significant moment as we move towards the end of 2008. 90 years ago, in 1918, the father of our democracy, Nelson Mandela, was born. 45 years ago, 1963, on the 26th of November, to be precise, the Rivonia Trial began. 10 years ago, the first real president of our democratic republic, Nelson Mandela, received the first interim report of the Truth and Reconciliation Committee from Archbishop Desmond Tutu. So this is quite a significant month in the annals of South African democracy. I wish, therefore, to commend the organizers of this event for bringing together so many of those who have an interest in these events. We have with us surviving trialists and lawyers, historians and archivists, and we have also the Lillis Leaf Trust as well as the Oppenheimer Family. I'm also pleased to acknowledge Mr. Richard Stengel, editor of Time magazine, who has also played an important part in the narrative of Madiba's long walk to freedom. I also appreciate the presence here of representatives of UNESCO, which oversees the Memory of the World Register, the Record of Humanity's Universal Archival and Library Heritage. The Rivonia Trial was a seminal event in the struggle for freedom in this country. The leadership of the ANC and its military wing controversies were rounded up by the security police in the raid on Lillis Leaf Farm in Rivonia, which gave its name to the trial. Nelson Mandela was already in prison, having been arrested for leaving the country without a passport. His arrest had taken place a little earlier near Houghton in the Midlands of KwaZulu-Natal. And we have on exhibit here one of the original warrants for his arrest. And we thank the Lillis Leaf Trust for having secured that warrant for the National Archives. Today, I wish to thank the Oppenheimer family and especially the late Mr. Harry Oppenheimer for their role in securing these records of the Rivonia Trial for the nation. Among the many mysteries attached to the Rivonia Trial is the fate of its documentation. The defense team were, we were told, very concerned that their offices and homes might be raided by the apartheid security police, and several members took steps to secure their records by depositing them with the South African Institute of Race Relations, who in turn deposited them with the Historical Papers Collection at the University of Witwatersrand William Cullen Library, which is where they are to this day. Other records are out of the country, and some were squirreled away for protection in the United Kingdom and other countries. The prosecution team, headed by the Transvaal Attorney General, Dr Percy Yutar, collected and generated copious records. Firstly, the police gathered records and other items used as evidence in the trial. There is the famous Mandela diary. And secondly, the process of building and presenting the case and attacking the accused generated a vast legal record. In terms of the archival legislation in force at the time, these records were public, state-owned records and should have been transferred to the then state archives within 30 years of the conclusion of the case. When the archivists began making inquiries in 1993 and 94, the Department of Justice transferred what records it had, and it was immediately obvious that this was not a complete court record as required by law. It later transpired that former Attorney General Dr Percy Yutar had taken a somewhat elastic view of the notion of proper property, and many of the records were retained by him. In the 1990s, he began to place these documents on the open market. Then President Mandela decided not to institute the prosecution of his former prosecutor, although I'm told the National Archives was very keen to do so. Mr. Harry Oppenheimer intervened and purchased the papers to prevent them from leaving the country. They remained cared for at the Brenthurst Library until this morning. The National Archives, Dr. Graham Dominic, signed the instrument of agreement on behalf of the state, and the records are now being returned to the National Archives. I want to commend the Oppenheimer family for their public spiritedness and cooperation, and I hope that their example will serve to inspire other prominent South Africans, and others abroad for that matter, who also purchased the Rivonia Trial documents from the late Dr. Yutar to return them to the National Archives as required by law. There is also an international dimension to this issue. South African government policy is to support the restitution of cultural property to its rightful owners. In this regard, our National Archives have returned material to Namibia and received materials from other countries. The Rivonia Trial and the documents related thereto mark an internal restitution of which we are very proud. The UNESCO Memory of the World Committee also recognized the universal significance of the Rivonia Trial records and has placed the body of records on the Memory of the World Register, that is the archives and library equivalent of the World Heritage List for buildings and sites. I intend to mark this at another ceremony at the National Archives early next year, and I hope that by then those persons still in possession of Rivonia Trial papers will have followed the example of the Oppenheimers and returned them to the National Archives. This bringing together of the official collection marks the beginning of a process whereby we can properly catalogue and conserve the whole collection in collaboration with other stakeholders such as the Brentons Library, Lily Sleep Trust, Mandela Foundation, and the University of the Witwatersrand. One major need is to raise funds for the reformatting of the audio recording of the trial, which is still in its original and now inaccessible dictabelt format. As government, we are strongly committed to the preservation of an accurate record of our country's past, however painful particular episodes might be. Humanity can only gain by looking the past squarely in the face. We South Africans as the people will benefit immensely by a capacity to critically examine our past and learning from it. Once again, I want to thank, in particular, President Mandela, who will be gracing this occasion later with his presence, and our thanks go also to all the others who have honored us here with their presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. There may be a little bit of an interlude. We're waiting for Madiba now to join us, and I'm afraid I'm not quite adept at entertaining you with jokes in the meantime, so you may mutually swap jokes until he arrives. You will be there soon.
Basis or the original of Rick Stanley. Which one are you talking about? Both of them. I believe, and Rick may correct me, I believe that the original that was on Robben Island and smuggled out was given to Rick as a basis, but that was very tiny. But Rick was given that as a basis of what was written on Robben Island.
I don't know where the actual physical original manuscript is, which was about 15 or 20,000 words. That I guess it was Mac who smuggled it out, and because of all the changes in technology, everything that I had originally was on diskettes, which don't exist anymore. It's like 8-track tapes, and that manuscript still exists, and if I can give an editorial comment, I think that should be published. That is the great historical document, and of course, you worked on that. You helped Madiba work on that in prison, and that really is an extraordinary document and very beautiful, actually. I hope someday it will be published, and that did, in many ways, furnish the basis for A Long Walk to Freedom, in addition to the interviews that we did.
So from
just
our
from
point of view, I happen to know a little bit about this because my partner was involved in transcribing the original handwritten done by Lalu. Was it done by you, Comrade? Yeah, by Lalu Chibwa. She was responsible for transcribing that, typing it. That manuscript, I think, went back to Mac Maharaj, which then served probably for your discs. But I think somehow that has gone missing. No one knows where the typewritten manuscript went to. It got lost somewhere along the line. It might be worthwhile to track it down because, again, it's very important. You started about it. I don't know exactly what happened to what you wrote, but presumably, if that is extant somewhere, that's even more valuable than all these others.
Yes.
Because everything comes from you.
As an artifact, it would be very valuable. In fact, Lalo and Mac would know, and Kathy would know. During the course of our interviews, I asked Madiba how was it actually smuggled out of Robben Island, and this was 1992-93 that I was asking him, and he would say, "I cannot tell you that. There are still men in prison, and they are still using this technique." So maybe these gentlemen here can explain, because I would be. You know the story.
May I?
Yes.
Just a bit of background. The origin of Long Walk was on Robben Island in 1974. When Mac was going to be released in 1976. So the idea came, and Walter Sisulu and I were walking, and the idea came that we must make some sort of a political statement on Madiba's 60th birthday in 1978. And then we took the suggestion to Madiba. He readily agreed, and he started writing. And then there was a little editorial committee of Madiba and herself and Walter. He gave the originals, his originals, to us for our comments. We handed them back. Whether he rejected or accepted our comments, we don't know. But that was then given to Mac and Lalu Chiba here. They transcribed 500 or 600 pages of Madiba's writing to less than 50 pages. And Mac was given the task, because he was being released, to smuggle that thing out. Chiba here had constructed from nothing what could be called an album. And in the covers of the album, he concealed the transcripts. But Mac and Chiba had, mainly Mac rather, had written, transcribed the thing, Madiba's original. Mac then transported it safely from Robben Island to Cape Town, from Cape Town elsewhere, transported it to Durban, had it transported it to London. And I have it on good authority that when the first government was announced by Madiba, Madiba made Mac the Minister of Transport. Yeah. Well, that's about all.
Thanks very much. That was actually quite an enlightening rather than an amusing interlude. Thank you very much. Mr. Mandela is about to arrive and to join us. Can we ask that people just switch off their cell phones? Apparently it's interfering with some of the technology here. I'm told you rather remain seated for the sake of the television cameras at the back.
Hello. Are you all right? Oh, no, not good. Okay. And that encouraged what I'm saying. so many young people together. This country will never die. Where are you going?
You sit first.
Hello, Aaron. How are you? Yes, hello.
Madiba, welcome. As we gathered here, and we've had some speeches already, but we gathered here for the presentation of the Rivonia Trial records over to the State Archives, and also sound recordings of interviews with Kathy and Rick with yourself to be handed over to the foundation. Welcome. Right, can I now call upon Nikki Oppenheimer and Minister Jordan for the presentation, the formal presentation of the Rivonia Trial records from Brenthurst to the National Archives.
I hope everybody can hear. It's a great pleasure to hand over the Rivonia papers that resided with the Chief Prosecutor. And that these will now be transferred to the National Archives. And Madiba, we want to thank you for your help in this process and your support in this process as well.
On behalf of a very grateful nation, we want to thank the Oppenheimer family for having first secured these papers on our behalf and kept them at the Brenthurst Library, and for the public-spirited manner in which they've now handed them to the National Archives. We hope this serves as an example. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oppenheimer and Mr. Jordan. And this now brings us in, speaking to the second part of the dual events that we're celebrating today. That's in regard to the sound recordings that will come to the Nelson Mandela Foundation and its Centre of Memory. And I now call upon first Rick Stengel and then Mr. Katrada to say a few words. And you can remain sitting there if you prefer.
Thank you very, very much. I'm delighted to be here and honored to be with you, Madiba, again. We've been a little bit informal this morning, so I want to tell the story of how I came down to work on Long Walk to Freedom with Mr. Mandela. I came down in December of 1992, and it was a very busy time then. It was before the election. It was a perilous time in South Africa. And I spent several weeks waiting to see President Mandela, and when I finally got in to see him to explain what the project was, we had a very nice and brief conversation, at the end of which Madiba said to me, "I assume we can do this one or two more times and we will have enough for the book." So I said, "If you think we'll have enough for the book after 2 or 3 sessions like this, you are crazy." At which point Barbara Masekela walked into the office and escorted me out, and I thought the project was over right there. Many, many hours later, 70 hours of tapes later, and months later, where I just affixed myself to Madiba and wouldn't leave, we had enough material for what is one of the greatest books, I believe, in the history of civilization. There's a great 19th century philosopher who asked the question, does history make the man, or does the man make history? And whenever I asked Madiba a question like that, he would look at me with a kind of curious glance and say, "Richard, why not both?" And of course, the answer is, it is always both. history made the circumstances to create a man like Nelson Mandela, and then Nelson Mandela grasped history by the lapels and changed it. And because of his life, because of his courage, because of his humanity, the history of the 20th century was changed, and I believe the history of the 21st century has changed. In my country, we now have a newly elected president, Barack Obama. I believe that Nelson Mandela paved the way for Barack Obama. It is the greatest privilege of my life to have worked with Madiba on Long Walk to Freedom. It was a privilege to be in his country, in his company. I missed him terribly when it was all over. I had one consolation, which is that I met my wife, Mary Pfaff, while I was working on the project, and Madiba always said, "You must marry her." And except for when I told him he was crazy in that first meeting, I never contradicted him thereafter. My mother-in-law is here today, and Long Walk to Freedom is a book that will be read for as long as people throughout history believe in justice, believe in humanity, believe in kindness, believe in fairness, and that is forever. And I thank you for the privilege of letting me work with you on that.
Now I'm going to just introduce the tapes. But before doing that, I think on behalf of the three Rivonia Trialists, I should thank George and Arthur here. I always say that they sent us to jail, but I have to I'm always reminded that they also saved our lives. So thank you for being here. Now about the tapes, between Rick and myself, there were 100 hours of tape. We're not going to play the 100 hours today. We are choosing just some extracts, 5 extracts, which will be played here. The 4 of them relate to, what had happened is that after Rick had taped his part of it, I was given the manuscript. And my conversations with Madiba was about the manuscript. If there were any amendments he wanted to make, any faults he wanted to find, etc. Because Madiba is very meticulous about commas and exclamation marks and so forth. So that took 40 hours between the two of us. So the first 4 extracts that we're going to hear in a little while relate to Madiba's underground days. When Madiba was underground, we were a group of people who had to find safe houses for him, safe transport, etc., etc. So he's recalling that, some incidents of those years, of the underground years. And the 5th extract is not from his underground days, but he's recalling something more recent than that. I should say, because fortunately Madiba always has the last word, and today we have the last word, so he won't have a chance to reply. Somewhere in the tape we are talking about Madiba's beard. Now when he was underground, we who were in this little group looking after his underground movements insisted that he should shave off his beard, because he was well known throughout South Africa, through papers and so forth, and he had to be disguised. But Madiba refused to shave. Some people have described it, he himself has described it as something else. I described it, and I'm not revealing any secrets. In an article I wrote on his 80th birthday, I said that was vanity. Anyway, without much ado, there are 2 tapes referring to Vredendorp, because we also had safe houses in Vredendorp. Now, what had happened is that, just to clarify a bit, Maulvi Kachalia, who was secretary of the Transvaal Indian Congress, had found these 2 houses for us. He spoke to the head of the household, and I must be very politically correct, head of the household was a male, but he forgot to tell the female, the household executive, So when Madiba turned up there, disheveled in an overall, and she asked, "Who are you?" So Madiba said, "Morgi Kachalia has sent me." She did, "I don't know you," and closed the door. On the second occasion, they did allow him in at another house in Trinidad, and the child came and says, "My mother is very scared, when are you leaving?" Anyway, I thought with that little introduction, we're ready to listen to the tape.
Yes, we are.
There are two cases. Cases, by the way, when I attended meetings in Forsberg, and I saw Turok and others on one occasion during the day. And Morgan went to a family in Forsberg. In Trinidad, that's right.
Yeah.
And said, look, somebody is going to come and stay here tonight. Could you accommodate him? They agreed very enthusiastically because they respected the Morgan. Now, I was wearing an overall, and very often I didn't comb my hair. And I went to this house, just to be aware of the house. Or they gave me the address and to tell them that I would come back in the evening. I knocked, and the lady came forward, opened the door. She said, "Yes, what do you want?" I said, "Well, Morgan Kachala has arranged that I should stay here." And he says, "I have no room for you." Bang the door. Because she saw this wild fellow, Yeah.
Now the second excerpt.
I don't know if I mentioned this one in Rivonia.
When you were shooting this?
No, not the one where I was shooting a bird.
Yeah.
But the chaps were building. Africans from Alexander. What happened, they say, was that as they were building, putting up buildings, then I would make tea for them, and I would pretend to be a chef. I'd make tea for them. And one day, you see, I called them to come and have tea in the kitchen. And they sat down, and I had a tray, and a sugar bowl, and I gave the tea to the first fellow, and he took a cup of tea. I was telling a story, and then he took sugar, and put it in, and then the second one, because he was concentrating on the story, he did not actually reach the bowl. And I stood there for some time, and then I moved away to the second chair. And he says, "Waiter!" And I came back, you see, and I got his sugar, you see. But he treated me very contemptuously, "Waiter!"
No, you haven't mentioned that one. It's a good one.
It's a place across that bridge under the railway.
Freedom.
That's right. Not very far from the other one. The other one was this side.
Yeah, yeah.
The other one was across there. So I met them. It was a cold day like this. So I had to have two meetings. One in the morning and the other one shortly thereafter. So as I was waiting for the second meeting, I went to the sun at the back of the building because well protected, so nobody could see me from outside. And a girl came, daughter of the house, came and said, "When are you going away?" So I said, "No, I'm waiting for other people." He says, "We want you to go. My mother is very scared."
What do you want that was?
And she said, "My mother has got a heart condition. She's very scared. And she wants you to go."
Right, just before we get on to the next one, when Madiba spoke of that bridge under the railway, now that had some significance for somebody who's here, because there's an electric transformer which was bombed by Chipa here. Anyway. But now we'll get on to another one, which is not, when Madiba was driving and accosted by police, but you'll get the full story on the tape.
Yes. Then one time, I don't know if I have dealt with this, I was coming from Cape Town. That was on the eve of the strike, you know? And I was coming from Cape Town with that little Austin of mine. And
the black one?
Yeah, the black one. And then I was stopped by the police. Now, then you see, I had, they were told in two separate areas, not very far from the other. I was stopped by the whites here, and they searched the car, and they found nothing. And they said, all right, boss. And then I came to the Africans. I roadblock is by Africans. And they looked at me. I'm sure one of them recognized me because he smiled and said, "Good."
You have dealt with this. Yeah.
Yes. And Chinese. Cases of impersonation. They are really heavy. Because
there was one instance, if you remember, some garage attendants also recognized you.
Yes, quite, yes. That's right. And, you see, the way in which you escape is sometimes you don't know how to. Because when I saw the roadblock, I instinctively stopped the car, you know, and I wanted to go around. And they could have shot me.
Yeah.
But I just decided, you know, to drive and to stop there, you know. And I saved myself, because otherwise they could have shot and killed me.
Yeah. But you refused to shave the beard.
Huh?
We tried to persuade you to shave your beard.
Yes.
Because that picture with your beard,
Yes.
we had it on the badges. You remember we had
Yes,
it on the
quite.
badges, the Free Mandela
Yes, quite.
Committee.
Yes.
But you wouldn't. And
Yes.
that was the most recognizable
Yes, quite.
thing about you.
You sometimes get attached to something, you know. I just got attached to the beard.
And now for the last extract. As our lawyers here, Arthur Chesterton and George Bezos will confirm, they told us right from the start, you must expect the worst. And the worst meant a death sentence. So, right up to the time when the judge says, stand up for your sentence, the expectation was death. What they didn't tell us, what Arthur told me after we were released from prison, and I accompanied Arthur to Robben Island in 95, 96. Arthur then tells me that, in fact, they knew the day before that we were not going to hang up. But they didn't tell us, for good reason, that the judge could change his mind. So when we stood up for our sentence, it was death, expected death, and Madiba had gone to the extent of scribbling the night before what he was going to say when he sentenced to death. And that is part of some book in Madiba's handwriting. Right, this is for the last bit of the tape.
And he said, a very friendly word, and he said, what do you think is going to happen to you in this case? I said, yes. And I was expecting him to say, no, they will never do that. But he thought and looked away from me. He said, you're quite right.
Yeah,
Did I mention that?
I think you did, yeah.
Now, I was concerned about my future, and that did not bring about, it was not an exciting moment, to think about your ultimate fate. And but we had, in fact, we said amongst ourselves, because we were warned by the lawyers to expect a capital sentence at least against some of us, and they identified it. And we said, let's go down under a cloud of ground. That was our story.
That I remember very well. Even we went further to say that we won't even appeal.
Yes, quite.
No, that I remember very well.
Well, that is the end of the tapes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Kathy. Thanks, Rick, and thanks for that moving recording. Now we'll go over to the public handover of the collection by Mr. Katara and Rick Stengel to the Nelson Mandela Foundation, and I call our archivist, Glenn Harrison.
We have to call in Glenn's strength. This is the whole collection.
Ladies and gentlemen, that brings to conclusion the events of this afternoon. Thank you very much again for joining us. It really is an historic event in archiving the very important moments in the history of our country. Thank you very much for that. Thank you for all of those at stage for your role in all of this. We and the nation are grateful to you for your roles played in this. Mr. Mandela and the group at the table will now leave the event. We thought to have a question and answer afterwards, but we had something. But Sam Fenter, our media person, says that the media is welcome to interact with her if there are any other questions. Thank you very much. This brings events to a close.
Can we have Dennis Goldberg to go and stand, and the two lawyers, please, behind quickly?
He's getting with us now, putting you drinking outside, okay? Yeah.
You don't like